Welcome to the Office of the Chief Scientist Science Seminar Series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vanessa Swarbrick, and I'm a Senior Science Advisor with the OCS, and I'm your host for this fall's seminars. On behalf of our entire OCS team, welcome to our Science Seminar Series. In the spirit of reconciliation, I respectfully acknowledge that today I am joining you from our OCS office located on the traditional lands and gathering place for Treaty 6 and Region 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. These lands are home to diverse Indigenous people, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our communities today. Wherever you are finding yourself today, I encourage you to recognize and acknowledge that the relationship that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have with the land upon which we all live, work, and learn. In keeping with the tradition of gathering, these science seminars provide an opportunity for us to get together and exchange knowledge on interesting science happening across Alberta in an open learning and sharing environment. The hope is that through our dialogue today, we are all able to improve our awareness and understanding, and then to put this new knowledge into practice to support evidence-informed decision-making wherever that occurs. So with that, today we are very excited to be joined by 4 panelists who will be sharing some of their experiences in a discussion about community-based lake monitoring and stewardship in Alberta. Lakes are of vital importance to communities across the province, and they hold significant cultural and spiritual importance to Indigenous peoples. As many of you in the audience may be aware, there are numerous community-based lake monitoring programs involving partnerships between Indigenous communities, government, and non-government organizations in Alberta. And while there's no one-size-fits-all approach, there are critical lessons that are emerging from these existing programs. So today, we will be talking with 3 to start, leaders working on community-based lake monitoring programs who will be sharing their learnings on building effective programs and partnerships. So sharing our insights today are Glinis Buffalo, Bradley Peters, and Zoey Wang. Glinis Buffalo is a member of the Samson Cree Nation in Masquatchee on Treaty 6 territory. She's the founder and president of Glinis Buffalo Consulting, an Indigenous-led professional planning agency that provides expert strategies to plan and implement land use and environmental and strategic and leadership goals. Glinis has over 20 years of professional experience and specializes in planning, policy, and engagement with Indigenous people, government, and industry. She is based in Edmonton, but she also currently volunteers as a member of the board of directors for the Pigeon Lake Watershed Association. Our second panelist today is Bradley Peter. He is the executive director with Alberta Lake Management Society and has been working with ALMS for nearly 14 years, developing and delivering community-based monitoring programs. Bradley is also a member of the steering committee for the Alberta Citizen Science Community of Practice. And our third panelist today is Zoey Wang, who is the Community-Based Monitoring Program Coordinator with the Community-Based Monitoring and Knowledge Unit at Alberta Environment and Protected Areas. That's a mouthful. Zoey has been working alongside Indigenous communities and scientists in developing, implementing, and evaluating community-based lake-based monitoring programs since 2014. And as a self-described curious practitioner, Zoey is keen to learn about and reflect on how different knowledge systems can be mobilized to support stewardship actions and decision-making. And so with all of that, that's enough of me speaking for a moment. I'm going to pass the microphone over to our panelists, where I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself briefly and in a few minutes, describe your relationship to today's theme and your experience with lake monitoring and stewardship. So I'm going to kick off and pass the microphone over to Brad.
Cool, thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, so for those who don't know the Alberta Lake Management Society, I'll just give a bit of background about the type of work that we do and its relation to Indigenous monitoring programs. So ALMS is a nonprofit organization based in Edmonton. We're actually pretty small. We just have 4 staff right now. And over the years, we've really specialized in delivering programs that improve our understanding and our awareness of lakes and reservoirs and their watersheds. And these types of programs really span a wide range of activities. Currently, some of the programs that we're running include routine kind of ambient monitoring of lakes, generally for the purposes of developing long-term trends. We have programs that are involved in assessing lakes more from a public health perspective. So looking for specific targets like Enterococcus, cyanobacteria, cyanobacterial toxins, those types of things. We have educational programs, an aquatic plant monitoring program, aquatic invasive species monitoring programs, educational programs, some resources and tools for conducting lake management, and more than that even. So our programs are quite wide-ranging, but what really links them together is this idea of a participatory approach to lake monitoring and lake management. And in my mind, this really encompasses the ideas of kind of citizen science and community-based monitoring. And so we often try not to collect any data or do any lake management unless there's a member of the public involved in that work. And one of these programs is called our Lake Keepers program, which really was born out of the need to fill some of the gaps left by more well-established monitoring programs in Alberta. And more recently, this Lake Keepers program has been adapted to support lake monitoring by Indigenous communities in Alberta's oil sands region. So we have about a year and a half, we're about a year and a half into that program right now. And then we have other Indigenous communities who have jumped onto the Lake Keepers program as well. And so I think that Lake Keepers program, this way that we're really like equipping and training people across the province to collect information and data, is really our tie to today's webinar and to Indigenous communities.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you for joining us, Brad, and great introduction. Next, I'll move the microphone over to Glinis.
Hi, everybody. My name's Glinis Buffalo. As Vanessa mentioned, I'm from Musqueam, Samson Cree Nation, and I've been working on the project in Mimiusaka so in Pigeon Lake, for almost over a year now, doing water sampling, fish sampling, working a lot with our elders, our youth, in terms of connection back to the water. Working with a partner, Alms. Alms is a partner on our project as well. So developing that. So on your question about importance of lakes and ecosystems. So what's really interesting is at some point, in the past, Pigeon Lake was an area where the Musqueam, I'm sure there was other nations using this to fish and hunt. Then of course, with development and industry happening, it's impacted fishing, it impacted the abundance of hunting in the area. So it's gone lower. There's definitely a less amount of hunting that Musqueam are able to do there. Same with fishing. There was a time when fishing was the way it was managed, that there wasn't enough fish there. And then, as we were kids, being there and then being told that you can't eat the fish, or you can't, it's not safe for swimming. And so it really impacted the nations in terms of to be there, right? The importance of a lake, our livelihood is simply taken away by industry in the area, right? And so those impacts. So in terms of that, that's impacted the importance of the lake. And we know, working with our elders, they've always said the connection to water, Nippy, that's who we are as Nahiyao people. It's important to us. And with our hunting, all our treaty rights are connected to being able to hunt and fish, pick medicines in the area. And so these are really important to us. Fisheries, fish, it's all a connection to who we are, being able to perform ceremonies near water, in water. Those are also really important to us to be able to do that. But when things get in the way, mismanagement, or not effectively working with partners, it really impacts people's being able just to be there and connect back with the land. And so part of when you asked about the importance of lakes, definitely important. Like, I know I can go on and say a lot about the treaty rights, but I think an important key message, though, is that the importance of lakes, especially Pigeon Lake, was heavily impacted. It's heavily impacted by surrounding development. So that's what we're working on there. And I'll stop there because I'll get into some other information later.
Yeah, we'll bring more in. And thanks, Glinis. You also gave us a little bit of a segue into some of the conversations we're going to have about importance of lakes. So I'm gonna pass it over to Zoey. Zoey, tell us a little bit about your experience in working on these types of programs, and then maybe you can build a little bit quickly on what Glinis was just saying about the importance of lakes, but from your perspective, right? Because we have different perspectives having you all on the panel bringing us all this new information. And then Brad, I'll circle back to you.
For sure. Thanks, Vanessa. And thank you, Bradley and Glinis for sharing. So my name is Zoey. I am a community-based monitoring program coordinator with the Community-Based Monitoring and Knowledge Unit within the Airshed and Watershed Stewardship branch within the Ministry of Environment and Protected Areas. I know it's a mouthful, but I think it's really important to recognize my small and mighty team because I acknowledge that partnerships, developing and sustaining partnerships, cannot be done by one person. It's a collective effort. So my connection with this topic today is that I have been the coordinator for the Indigenous Lake Monitoring Program pilot that happened between the years of 2016 and 2023. During those years, we worked with watershed scientists, monitoring technologists, and 4 First Nations in Alberta, and collected samples on culturally important lakes in 7 of the lakes in Alberta. And so we worked with Big Stone Cree Nation, which Troy is a land manager for, and Cold Lake First Nations, Denida First Nation, and Whitefish Lake First Nation. So it's really important for our team to build connections, respectful relationships with Indigenous communities, because we believe through those respectful relationships, we can begin to co-create knowledge and bring forward deeper understanding of the lakes and ecosystems, and that will inform into different ways of stewarding. So the importance of lakes and ecosystems, from my experience, I think like Vanessa was sharing in the very beginning, I think me personally, I'm a guest on this land, and I wanted to acknowledge the stewards and guardians of this land that we call Alberta. So the Dene, Cree, Blackfoot, Stoney, Métis peoples, just to name a few. I've had the privilege of working alongside them for some years. And so what really resonated with me is their deep connection, cultural and spiritual connections with lakes and its ecosystems. And so whenever I have a visit with community members to talk about lakes, they always start with sharing with me the names of those lakes in their Indigenous languages, their cultural and spiritual connections, their origin and creation stories, and also their people's interactions with the lakes. And so I think that really highlights the importance of the positive reciprocal relationships those communities have, those Indigenous peoples continue to have with the lakes and the ecosystems. And so I think it's a privilege to be working alongside them and learning from them.
I'm gonna bump back to Brad for just a second, give you a chance to just tell us a little bit from your perspective. I guess, why are lakes important? We sort of melded my questions together there, Glinis. I'm sorry I jumped ahead for you, but I'm gonna give Brad a second to answer that one question, and then we'll move on to some of our others.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I think from the more Western science perspective, I used to do this as well, but we can sometimes fall into this trap of thinking of lakes as kind of isolated mesocosms, like in the context of a broader watershed or ecosystem. And I've really come to realize, and I'm sure many folks on the call have the same realization, that lakes actually become a reflection of the health of the watershed around them. And that's why a lot of the tools that we have for lake management are focused on watershed management as opposed to actual like in-lake treatment techniques. So I think when we consider managing the health of lakes, or when we consider maintaining the health of lakes, what we're hopefully doing is actually maintaining the health of the landscape and the broader ecosystem. And so I think lake management is actually crosses a lot of different boundaries. And so I think if we can maintain the health of our lakes, then we can do a lot towards maintaining the health of the broader environment.
Yeah, I hear you. And especially coming from a Western science perspective, it's a good reminder that you're right. I don't disagree. We often do think about them as these sort of mesocosm systems. I like that analogy. So we did hear a little bit from all three from you about some of the partnerships that you've been involved with and why these sites are so significant. When we think about the partnerships that you have formed and the programs that you're leading, can you tell me a little bit about how you got started? What were the key steps that needed to be taken to ensure that the partnerships you're working on were successful? And so I'll start with Glinis. Tell me a little bit about how you got started.
Sure. Well, there's a few partnerships with this project. There's a summer project that we partnered with the University of Alberta to do a land camp. We partnered with Alberta Fish and Wildlife to do some of the sampling. Like I mentioned, we partner with ALMS, so with Bradley's group, to do the water sampling. So we've done summer sampling. We're moving into winter sampling as well. So that's coming up. So I guess in terms of starting, for me, I guess it was really important that to understand how we're benefiting from each other, right? Like that's really important. And to see how the information we're sharing with each other is going to be used like on both ends. Like that's really important to me, to understand how agreements on the partners end, how they're being fulfilled. Like that's because I know, I'm pretty aware of agreements and how, how host in certain events, how they can help benefit both achieve goals on their own, like their own strategic plans. So that's important to me to know how it's being used as well, because I know it shows, I guess, the goals that both groups are working on. And then in terms of I guess the some of these partnerships, they really just grew with being introduced. One person says, hey, like this Brad, you can work with ALMS, but they're really great to work with, and they are. I've really enjoyed like the benefit with working with ALMS is being able to do the sampling, and build capacity in the community members, so we can confidently be able to collect water samples and be able to submit these, right, with confidence. And then so that was really, I guess, how they started. And then just through trial and error, the process was developing. So with Fish and Wildlife, what I really appreciated is, to see their method of collecting fish. So it was really important to learn about, Western method and seeing that approach in terms of a partnership. And then from our perspective, we really wouldn't call in this Naheo science and traditional knowledge, the Naheo people and how they're doing, building our data with the work that we're doing. So that was really important for the partnership, just to understand that and just seeing how we can work together. We're working on fisheries. I'm working with a couple of groups on analysis of fisheries. So it's going to be really interesting to see sort of what the analysis comes out to. And to me, a partnership is about looking at those results and you know, if it's collective, great. If it's not, like if we can challenge each other, like to me, those are partnerships where you can challenge each other, you can, and you know, still be able to work alongside with each other in terms of outcomes. So those are, so me, like in terms of your question about how did it start, me, it's really more of the values of what a partnership represents. So it should be long-term, right? It should be long-term, should be based on mutual benefit, and it should be based on being able, just being flexible, like being able to share that information. And so really, I guess that's, yeah, like that's about how I feel about partnerships. It's the values that it really should represent. Thank you.
I can see Bradley and Zoe nodding a little bit with that too. So I'll pass the microphone over to you, Zoe. Can you comment a little bit about how you got started on some of these programs and partnerships you've been working on, and what were the key components to developing that partnership?
For sure. And I'm really glad that Glinis started us off. And I think a lot of what you shared, Glinis, really resonates with me. And I think for the Indigenous Lake Monitoring Program pilot, our relationship with the watershed scientists and water monitoring technologists, as well as most of the First Nations who were part of the pilot, stemmed from an Aboriginal environmental monitoring technician program that we piloted back in 2015. And that program was developed in response to Indigenous communities' desire to build up skills and also to be more active in participating in provincial environmental monitoring activities. And so during that program, we created a lot of opportunities for scientists and researchers to share information and knowledge with Indigenous community members from all, I think mostly from the oil sands region. And so there was a session where our favorite aquatic scientist, Ron Zerowal, was talking about the provincial lake monitoring program that he oversees. And after that, a few community members approached Ron and asked all sorts of questions. And so that was the catalyst for the relationship start. And we started the pilot with Big Stone Cree Nation because a technician from that program approached Ron with a photo of a diseased walleye from North Wabasca Lake that has wart-like growths on the fish, and he was expressing concerns about the fish health and water quality in the North Wabasca Lake. And so in the following years, we partnered with Big Stone Cree Nation and a few other nations to look at water health in lakes of local importance. And we also got a lot of support from water monitoring technologists from our department to go out and take samples from those lakes with Indigenous technicians. We also put in a lot of effort in co-creating reports that are useful to the Indigenous communities after the water samples have been collected. So I guess the partnership starting point for me is the recognition that Indigenous peoples and perspectives are missing from the picture of provincial lake monitoring. And the partnership I think we have developed and sustained over the years really highlights the importance of co-creating that knowledge, and that's reflective of Indigenous perspectives that would bring forward the rich understanding that we have for the lakes and watersheds. So the partnership we have had, I guess, with the four First Nation partners really evolved and deepened over the years. At the very start, I think most of the effort is in the data collection phase, where Ron and water monitoring technologists would go out with the Indigenous community members to collect water chemistry, physical measurements, and biological data from those lakes. And over the years, it really shifted. Our focus have shifted for this program in Indigenous communities taking more of a lead role in the co-creation of reporting products. So for the most recent years for Big Stone and Cold Lake First Nations, they really focused on framing out what knowledge co-creation should look like and how Indigenous communities can take more an active role in designing and delivering place-based lake monitoring programs. So I think I'll stop there. I see the hand that Vanessa is giving me, but I think, yeah, no, I just wanted to acknowledge that relationship. I think our partnership really is grounded in respectful relationship. That's the starting point of the successful partnerships that we've had.
So thanks, Zoe. I think we're seeing some themes emerge. Brad, I'll pass the microphone to you. If you could just tell us a little bit about how you got these programs started, what's sort of the key element to successful partnerships being started and built?
Yeah, sure. So the Alberta Lake Management Society has run one of our core programs called Lake Watch for over 25 years now. And it's a really successful program. It's got this partnership model where we work with folks out on the landscape to collect in tandem water quality data and information. And it's building good long-term trends, but this program always required our staff to be out with that individual while we collected the data. It wasn't actually equipping or training individuals in Alberta to collect data independently. And one of our organization's strategic objectives is actually around supporting Indigenous communities in achieving their own monitoring objectives, as opposed to going out into a community and maybe collecting the data that we wanted to see collected. So we looked at developing a newer program, which we called the Lake Keepers program. And this really was designed to fill some of the gaps left by that established Lake Watch program. And the gaps being both kind of geographic. The Lake Watch program was not successful at getting to lakes far from some of these major urban centers. And temporally as well, we were only looking at lakes from a summer open water season perspective. And we know that lakes are active and interesting even in the wintertime, that a lot of Albertans care about winter lakes because they're out on the landscape fishing. And so we designed this Lake Keepers program to be really adaptable to lakes that were far away from Edmonton, and a program that could be run in the winter season where we don't have data. We have very little data in Alberta for that. So the way that this program worked initially was that we just made it open to anyone who wanted to get involved. We said, we'll give you all the equipment you need. We'll give you all of the training you need. We'll cover the shipping costs. You just have to participate and collect that information, and we'll help you understand it and store that data. And so that's how the Lake Keepers program started, but it really became a really useful template for working with Indigenous communities. And I think that was recognized by one of the scientists in oil sands monitoring a few years ago, who said, hey, could you adapt this program to support monitoring by Indigenous communities as well? Which makes sense because a lot of these communities, especially in the oil sands region, they are far from Edmonton. It's difficult to have staff traveling back and forth. So why not take advantage of the great resources that we have up there, the environmental technicians that are already in these communities who can do this work. And so that really created the template for this. And I think we really benefited from some of the existing relationships and partnerships within oil sands monitoring. But what's really important to us, and our program manager, Kirsten Perrin, who's leading most of this work, is building relationships with communities. And so making sure that every community is visited every season and that there's a friendly and familiar face, that we build trust, I think is really critical. We've spent, as Glinis mentioned, we've spent some time out sampling with their community. And in addition to being able to support them in the training and monitoring, I think it's equally as important that we're out there building relationships and having fun together. And so that's kind of how the program got started. But I think what's so critical to making sure the program continues is building healthy relationships.
I think it's really interesting that was the key theme from all three of you, is about relationships and communication and getting to know each other and having potentially different goals, but communicating those goals and coming together. Whereas typically from my Western science perspective, I'm like, okay, what's your hypothesis? What's your question? But obviously, looking at these types of partnerships, you're coming with a different approach that has to be addressed first. And it's really about building those relationships, is what I'm hearing from you guys. I'm going to move to our third question, which is more about the challenges that you have experienced. The reality is that a lot of these programs can be difficult to turn into sort of long-lasting programs. So, based on your experience, what are some of the challenges that you've encountered ensuring that these programs are successful, and what can we do to maintain them? Rather than just kicking them off, looking back, what were some of your biggest challenges? And I'll start this time with Zoey.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Vanessa. I think the biggest lesson I learned through the Indigenous Lake Monitoring Program pilot is that, just building off of what we have discussed, relationships do not end when project is complete. So some of the chat, we just had a program evaluation complete for the Indigenous Lake Monitoring Program pilot. And in one of our follow-up conversations with a First Nation partner to share evaluation findings, as well as to talk about what we can do next, he shared a little bit of a reflection in that he was a little disappointed with how we ended the project, in that we spent a few years co-creating reporting products with him and his nation after the monitoring is complete. However, after that, when he reached back to us to seek support on some of the other funding applications, as well as study opportunities to look at habitat restoration, we meaning our team and also the watershed scientists, were not able to support him and his nation in the way that he really needs. And so, for a variety of different reasons, from my end, it was lack of time and lack of expertise. However, I think it was a really good lesson for me in terms of needing to acknowledge that open and honest communication with partners at the start and during and also after the project is so critical to maintain these relationships, because relationship is key, as we just heard from all the panelists, in sustaining these partnerships, and how to uphold the relational accountability even after the project is complete, I think, and explore with partners how to best support them maybe outside of the context of one particular project, is my biggest lessons learned.
I'll throw it over to Bradley.
Sure.
What are some of the challenges you've experienced?
Yeah, I think because the program that we're running, at least in the oil sands region, is so new, we're discovering these challenges and working to adapt our program to address them. And that takes time. So I think one of the biggest challenges is the restrictions imposed on us by a lot of the Western funding timelines, whether it's the reporting and funding timelines within a grant agreement that you're struggling to achieve your deliverables on, but how can you do that in a year when you're still trying to build relationships and build trust? I think we're really restricted by those timelines. I think if we are bound by a tight timeline, then we're often going to default to what we know. And especially from someone who is designing and delivering lake monitoring programs, the easiest thing for me to do is to deliver a model that we already have in place. And unfortunately, that's not always going to resonate with Indigenous communities. As a Western scientist, I'm obsessed with like phosphorus and nitrogen, but Indigenous communities, their traditional indicators might be more so tied to the taste of fish tissue. And are we actually measuring parameters in our programs, or are we taking the time to build out our programs to make sure that the parameters we're understanding are ones that are going to resonate with elders and Indigenous communities? We often don't have time to do that. And so I think, this can be a challenge to the groups that are offering funding as well, is to really understand that and consider that and trust the organizations and partnerships to take a few years to achieve deliverables as opposed to working within a really tight fiscal year. So what's really fortunate, I think, is that we've had good funding for the Lake Keepers program through organizations like the Alberta Conservation Association and EcoTrust and oil sands monitoring and environment and protected areas. We've had good funding. And so I think we still have a long way to go, though, in terms of designing a program that's really properly braiding Western science and Indigenous knowledge, as opposed to just parachuting in a pre-existing Western science program.
Thanks for that, Brad. And Glinis, I'll give the last comment on this particular question about challenges to you.
Yeah, so this is a good question. So what was interesting in our project was trying to come up with like to design it, kind of like to Bradley's point about designing what the sampling is going to look like that's meaningful to the elders of what they're saying and to what the concerns are. Can you eat the fish? Is it safe? Is the water safe to drink? So looking at those and trying to come up with a study that looks at it. So what was a challenge I found interesting is when I approached a couple people in government, in Alberta government, to talk about this and get their insight. So it was really, it was interesting to get connected to, say, University of Alberta professors to see what kind of help or partnership could be offered. But it was really interesting is that I immediately noticed that once I would explain our project, we're going to have elders, youth, we're talking about NAHO science, we're talking about monitoring abundance and treaty rights. It was really interesting how some of the people I was introduced to would immediately include their study that they're doing, right? And how they can bring their study into our like what we're looking at. And so that was a challenge because that wasn't what we were asking. Like, and I totally could see how they're gonna benefit and probably elevate their project and probably win tons of awards because of they get to benefit from all the knowledge from my nation, because they're going to be surrounded with content. They're going to hear firsthand from elders. They're going to hear firsthand concerns that I know would really elevate. Like in the end, I just knew it was going to benefit them more than us. So that was a challenge to be able to figure out how to ask certain groups and feel that trust to be able to work together, because that's just something I noticed right away. Like I noticed right away how they would totally benefit from it, and we were gonna, like, we would be a case study for them, right? And that wasn't the intent, wasn't the ask. So either there was challenges in the way maybe I was communicating, there's challenges in what the science community hears from nations and how they're responding. So that's a big challenge. Like that's a really huge challenge that I definitely challenge, people on the call, people in the audience to think about is when nations are approaching you for, your insight, like, to me and the benefit would have been just to say, okay, like these are certain parameters you can think about. You're in charge of the data, right? Like, because I saw right away our data was now going to become their data, right? And like, and when we had talked all about today, the importance of relationship, none of these groups had a relationship with Samson, right? So immediately they were like, I can see they were gonna walk into gold. Like, and that wasn't the intent. And so I think like with challenges, when we talk about challenges, that's where I feel like probably, I know like that's probably, I'm guessing that's where nations are definitely hesitant about sharing their information, because I've worked in other areas, and I know how once you get into a nation's data and their project, I really understand how it elevates, like it's gonna elevate their project and help them win awards. And that's like, I mean, if the nation benefits from the award, awesome. But if it's one-sided, that's not the ask. So that was a challenge I really had to work through and find people that were that were on, I guess, like in our corner, on our side and willing to help. And that might mean that I know that we're having tough conversations and they're having these conversations with us. And just sharing information with me, and I appreciate that. Not not worry, like, or yeah, I guess that was my challenge. That's a challenge.
That's a really interesting perspective, Glinis, and I'll be honest, one that I hadn't really thought about coming from my area of work. So it's a good reminder to build those relationships and be genuine and open about goals and intentions, but to be honest in your early relationships about why we're running these programs. And I feel like I just had a big lesson learned right there, Glinis. So thank you for sharing that. Moving on to question 4, it's really about looking forward and where do we go next. So based on these learnings and experience, we've heard a lot of common themes just so far around relationships and relationship building and clear early communication. So maybe I didn't mean to lead you guys, maybe that's where we're going, but maybe you'll have different perspectives on, based on your learnings and experience, what's coming next? What are the big opportunities that you see coming down the line to advance lake stewardship? And you know what, Glinis, I know I just had you there on the line wrapping up, but just in the interest of changing orders, I'm going to get you to start this time.
Sure.
So what do you think are the future opportunities to advance lake stewardship?
So I guess in terms of like stewardship and community-based monitoring, like I know this isn't a new thing, right? Like I know this has been a conversation. I used to work at Alberta, I think like 5 years ago. I can't remember how long it's been. But we've had these conversations on community-based monitoring. And and when I listen to Alberta talk sometimes, it's about, well, this is really new. And I'm always like, it's not new. We've been talking about this for a long time. These conversations, like nations have been, even through consultation, nations have been providing this information back to government for a long time. So I hopefully, like in terms of lake stewardship, is that the scientists, they challenge themselves to look at your internal policies of how you are taking this data, like even this, I know you guys said this session's recorded, but how does it go up to leadership? How is it talked internally with your group, like in terms of your, your weekly meetings? Because I know that's where the power is. It's inside the internal policies of Alberta, of how you incorporate and you implement what we're saying, right? Like I think on this call, there's lots of good ideas of things that have been done. And so in terms of implementation, that's super important for community-based monitoring. Like I think that's gonna impact the lake stewardship. You know, like there's lots of internal tools. I forget what they call them, performance reviews, or I forget what they're called, where, you know, you say, this is what I'm going to do, in terms of your commitment to your employer. So those are really like good ways to challenge each other and put those into your plan, your work plan, that these are the lake stewardship implementation tools that I'm going to work on. Because I want Nahil monitoring to be, you know, like to be the thing. Like that's what is a goal out of this project. We're always talking about monitoring with the elders, you know, and we talked about it on the call. It's like, how are, you know, that like when we've talked about some of our meetings, the elders said like the abundance of fish compared to now, right? Like that is a direct impact to treaty rights, right? Like when there's a less abundance of plants and fish, like it's a direct impact to our treaty rights. So I would say, like in terms of like stewardship, um, and you know, and the people who are implementing these, to really look at your internal tools, because I know like earlier, I think Zoey said there was a lot of Indigenous perspectives missing. And to me, like that's a challenge, because I know nations have been saying this for a long time. You know, I've been to Alberta consultation meetings, I've been to lake stewardship meetings. And so this isn't new. So it would be great to see progress of some, you know, things that have been said in the past, because we talk about natural law, we talk about treaty rights all the time. We've shared traditional knowledge, we've shared what could be happening to be able to like help fill that space and those gaps that we keep saying are gaps. Like there's a lot of content out there. So that's what I think, to me, like that's a future opportunity, is really challenging ourselves, everyone on the call, of how are we implementing these tools, and tomorrow, how do we take this back to our work, and not, you know, like really building, really immersing it in your work. Because like that's important, because that's what's going to make legacy projects. Thank you.
It reminds me a second ago, Brad, how you mentioned when we are used to doing things a certain way, we tend to keep doing it the same way. So take on that challenge. I think it's a good reminder. Thank you, Glinis. I'm going to pass it to Zoey. Do you have any comments on where you see future opportunities for advancement?
Oh, Vanessa, I have lots of thoughts, but I'm going to share two. I'm going to share a couple, just I think building off of what Glinis and Bradley shared before. To start off, I think stewardship to me requires, you know, different and new ways of understanding, and different ways of caring for and acting in the landscape, and which is informed by best available Indigenous, local, and scientific knowledge. And so to that end, I think building off of our experience from the Indigenous Lake Monitoring Program pilot, an opportunity I'm seeing is to really work with Indigenous communities in the program design. So that's something that Glinis and Bradley both shared before, because I think in the design phase, really, you can talk about your questions and methodologies, indicators, and what are you going to be highlighting in terms of your perspectives, your values. And so, for example, like for the Indigenous Lake Monitoring pilot, we didn't have the opportunity to include fish in when we're doing the lake monitoring, but that's just really a challenge, but also a point of confusion for communities, because to the Indigenous community partners that we've worked with, this is a no-brainer that if you're looking at fish, if you're looking at water quality, how does that impact the health of the fish? But it wasn't a kind of a fish health and population wasn't looked at the same time. And we understand that wasn't kind of the opportunity there. So, but Ron did a lot of the work in building fish population information into the reporting as much as he could, and kind of really supported that piece of information in kind of sharing with the communities, understanding this is a point of interest for a lot of Indigenous communities. So the first point, I think the opportunity is whenever possible to work with the Indigenous communities in the design phase. The other thing that I wanted to it's coming to my mind is really to support culturally appropriate ways of knowledge sharing. So I was really hoping that Troy would be here for this, but Troy, for example, Big Stone Cree Nation, we've worked together for many years and co-created reporting products. However, Troy has made a lot of requests during these years for us to come to the Wabasca, coming to the community and sharing the findings from those monitoring initiatives to a broader community audience at a community gathering or a forum, because a lot of Indigenous communities that we work with might not be only working on one project that's related to water. So for Big Stone Cree Nation, I know that they have been involved in different research projects and participating in different government-led initiatives. And so for them, it's really important for the broader communities to get an understanding, to connect the dots, what's happening in their water. And so findings and lessons learned from different studies, I think would really be beneficial when we talk about it together at a community forum. And so for reports, it's good for maybe one or two key people that have been directly involved in this project for us, but I think a lot of the community members that we've worked with really wanted to invite us and to support more culturally appropriate ways of knowledge sharing, in terms of it's not only the technical reports or the numbers in the chart that matters. It's how you explain the findings and lessons learned in the context of what matters to the community, whether it's impacts on drinking water or the fish health. So yeah, I think that would be a really good opportunities for us to explore, is to support culturally appropriate ways of knowledge sharing.
Thank you for that, Zoe. Last, I'll pass it over to Bradley, can you tell me a little bit about what you think the future opportunities are for advancement?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and I was just kind of taking some notes as Zoe spoke. It kind of, just to pick up on your point, Zoe, about co-creating the questions and the study. I think that's so critical, and it goes back to kind of what Glinis was saying and what I was saying about funding, that if the organizations who support this work and fund this work don't give us the time or build in the time to co-create those questions and build those relationships, then the support really becomes very superficial. And so then who's really benefiting from the project? It's probably the people who are doling out the funding and saying, look how many Indigenous programs we supported. But if it's not done in the proper way, with the proper timelines, in a meaningful way, it becomes really superficial. So I think, again, I kind of challenge the folks who are supporting these projects with funding to listen to what we need to do it properly and to build proper relationships. So I think that's an ongoing challenge, a future opportunity, I guess, whichever way you want to swing it. Another opportunity, I think, would be around improving the way that we look at historical environmental conditions, as well as trying to model future environmental conditions. I think a lot of the programs that we run are quite effective at describing current environmental conditions, but we often fail at reconstructing the history or predicting future impacts. And oftentimes the Indigenous communities that we work with, they want to know how their lake has changed, not just what their lake is doing right now, but has it been impacted? Has it changed? Can we collect data that supports the knowledge that's being shared by the elders who are saying that it has changed? And I think if we go into an Indigenous community and say, like, look, we actually have like a 20-year long-term trend, they're probably just going to laugh at that, because 20 years is not long-term from their perspective. It might be impressive for like the size of a Western science database, but I think we need to continually adapt our programs again to make sure that we're answering the questions that communities have. And if we continue to just keep describing current environmental state, I think we're going to miss the opportunity to answer some of those really important questions. So we have to keep adapting our programs as we work together, so that we don't get burnout or we don't lose interest from communities because they decide, well, this program's not actually doing what we were hoping it would do. So as the program designers, we need to, I think, be ready to continually adapt to those challenges.
Thanks, Brad. I have like a whole page of notes here, and it's just so interesting listening to the common themes that are coming out here. Hearing about obviously the importance of the relationships and really thinking about Glinis. I'm still like really resonating on your comment about how we do or don't as Western sciences come to the table with the intent to co-create and co-design and co-share knowledge. And I'm just I'm just so excited on what I'm learning today. What do you think are the greatest threats to lake condition or lake management or lake stewardship? When you think about all of these challenges that we've talked about, or opportunities, think about, obviously I came to this question from a Western science perspective, and I thought about my musicosm and the issues of the landscape, but what do you think are the biggest threats to lakes? And I'll start this time with Zoey.
Actually, I need to think more about it. So could you start with someone else?
Does anybody want to put up their hand to go first? Otherwise, I'll tag Brad.
Sure, I will.
Okay, Glinis, you go ahead.
So there's, I mean, we know the obvious, like it's biodiversity, it's climate change, you know, all of those things that we talk about. Those are threats. I guess when you think about, you know, when my focus is right now is Pigeon Lake. You know, threats are lack of policy. You know, when you look at land management policies of, you know, everybody who's involved, the province, agriculture, nation, right? It's all policies. Those are like those, you know, if you're not having land policies that are creating, you know, like all these good things that we're talking about, that's a threat. You know, it's a threat to that. I guess a couple of threats to, you know, you know, where today we're talking about Western knowledge and not coming to the table as with the insight to co-create, like that's a threat, right? Like, because if the people that are being trained to lead these conversations and guide nations on this, like if they're not skilled in that, like that's a really big inhibitor to a successful project. So that's a threat. And then, so another threat though, in just terms of land, is like the lack of knowledge on treaty rights. When people like I mean I'm no expert in treaty rights. I'm learning all the time. Like what I do know about treaty rights is that when you know, when it's gone, like when something comes developed, but it's not, or even like you can develop things, but if it's not co-created, right? Like that's where it breaks down. Because those are Nahale methods, traditional methods, they weren't included in that design, right? So because anytime land gets taken up and it hasn't considered how do we retain, how do we make sure that treaty rights, like there's still ways to access it. Like that's a huge threat, like to, you know, everybody in the area, because we're not able to be on the land and everybody's not able to benefit from it. So those are to me, like if we can't resolve those, like we're just not going to have good legacy projects if we're not addressing these with those in mind. yeah, so those are threats to me.
Bradley, do you want to go next? Zoe,
Sure.
are you feeling? Yeah, I'll pass it to Bradley.
Okay. Yeah, to Glinis's point about the lack of policy, I think this is a common theme in Alberta where there is almost no structure to lake management in Alberta. It's almost voluntary. In fact, a lot of the lake management efforts that happen in Alberta are driven by volunteer organizations like watershed stewardship groups. And unless there's an active stewardship community around a lake, then that lake often won't get monitored and certainly won't get any management, and there won't be a local advocate saying, hey, look at this change or look at this impact happening on the landscape or in the water. And so as an organization, we kind of have recognized that challenge. And so we developed a program called the Lake Watershed Stewardship Community of Practice. And we're inviting watershed stewardship groups and stewards to gather in a common place and just share with one another, as opposed to kind of this more traditional, like didactic, we'll bring in an expert and they'll explain to you something about a subject matter. We're allowing these stewards to connect with each other and share ideas and actually feel like they're part of a stewardship community. I think one of the biggest threats would be becoming complacent about stewardship. And it does take effort. We can't take for granted that people will care about lakes. That doesn't happen. So what's been really great working with Indigenous communities that I think they do really well, and Glinis did an incredible job of last winter, was involving youth in environmental monitoring and environmental management. Glinis brought a ton of youth out onto the ice who were fishing and drilling holes and like using augers for the first time. And so incorporating youth and building a stewardship ethic is really critical, because I think if we don't have a stewardship ethic in Alberta, then that's a huge threat to the monitoring and management of lakes.
Thanks for that, Bradley. Zoe?
Yeah, thank you for coming back to me. And I just wanted to build on Glinis and Bradley's point. I think also something that we learned from the Indigenous Lake Monitoring Program pilot, the evaluation process is loud and clear from our First Nation partners. Monitoring for monitoring's sake is not enough, and collecting data is not the point. And so monitoring needs to be connected to decision making. And so decision making, to what end? There are different levels of decision making. And so towards the stewardship end of things, I think that when partnerships that's grounded in respectful relationships generate different ways of understanding the lake and ecosystem health, we're hoping that this information form into opportunities in decisions, including environmental management frameworks, land use planning, resource management decisions that government makes. And yet communities that we have been working with are expressing, they're not part of those decisions and decision-making processes, and also struggling to draw the linkage between the monitoring data that we have been working on through the ambient monitoring program, science and monitoring program, to those decisions. And so I think wanting to put it out there, we are in the process of making the evaluation report publicly available. I think it's in the works. And so wanted to share it out in this platform, that if you're interested in looking at the report, feel free to send me a message, and be happy to share it out when it's publicly available. And I think the hope is that the learnings from this pilot experience, and also from developing and sustaining partnerships, can create those opportunities and entry points for for better decision making. So creating those learning dialogues with Indigenous communities and our partners in the government to see how monitoring the knowledge that has been generated through monitoring programs can inform into better decisions.
Some lessons learned obviously here for my community in the GOA science world. Lots of good learnings. I don't want to rush our exit, but I know we are just a couple minutes over the end of our meeting, and I really want to make a really heartfelt thank you to our panelists today who have made the time to share their experiences and come with a generous and open perspectives. I think there was a lot that we in the audience have learned today. So huge thank you for that. Thanks to everybody else who has joined us from the audience today. This is our last science seminar for 2023. We will be back in the new year, and I hope you can join us for some of the talks that are coming up starting at the end of January. There is a mailing list. If you'd like to participate in these science seminars, please do contact us at aep.ocs@gov.ab.ca. And likewise, if you have any follow-up questions for our panelists, please be sure to email us at that aep.ocs at gov.ab.ca, and we will put you in contact with them. So there are lots of thank yous and shout outs to you guys coming in from the audience, and I'm just, again, so grateful. So we will end our panel discussion here today, and thank you all for tuning in. See you in 2024.